Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 243. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Zaq Baker about his debut novel, Unspectacular. This family dramedy is about young people trying to balance a career in music with family struggles and everyday life. The story is told in two primary narratives. May, a 20-year-old music student who doesn't really want a career in music, but who is expected to be the next big thing, and Ajay, a software engineer and skilled drummer who struggles to balance the job at which he is expected to excel with the music career he desperately wants. Zaq Baker has written what he knows. He's been singing and writing songs since he was 15. A professional musician and songwriter, Zaq plays in about 10 different bands, so writing Unspectacular began as a private creative project just for himself. In this episode, I'll chat with Zaq about his writing journey, why he likes to write about sad things with positive takeaways, and his unique concept for his Unspectacular book tour, as well as a few other things coming up. Zaq Baker, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Stacey. I appreciate it.
I thought what we could do today is talk about your debut novel, Unspectacular. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, happy to do that. Unspectacular is a work of fiction. It just came out beginning of January of this year. It's a music novel, and it's primarily two narratives. And we were talking just before this about not risking spoiling anything, so I don't know how much detail to get into, but it's two primary narratives, and both of them are young people who are trying to balance everything demanded of them by a music career and all the psychological underpinnings of that, and the other aspects of family dynamics and day-to-day life. And those two narratives almost intertwine throughout the book.
Let's talk about your two main characters, because I think it's important to introduce them, because as you say, they sort of kind of weave together, their storylines cross, they bump up against each other a little bit, but they're on two very different journeys. And yet the similarity, you can see this, they are struggling with similar things. So let's talk about May first.
Yeah, most of Unspectacular is written from the first-person perspective of May Strand. In fact, many of the people who read the book got back to me and read her portions of the book as journal entries, which I thought was interesting because I think they come across so confessional that they almost feel like a diary. And for most of the novel, she's kind of explaining this feeling of like, I'm 20 years old, I'm not a kid anymore, I'm not an adult anymore. I have some kind of like resentment issues with my parents that I'm trying to figure out. And from page one, the specific thing she's dealing with is this really outsized, like kind of music industry pressure that's coming from both of the putative parents in her household, and saying like, I'm kind of tired of being constrained by this, dear reader, these are my problems, sort of. But she has a very, I would say, personal voice. And I guess, Stacey, you read the book, so it's like she's very open about kind of the stuff that makes her so moody. And that's one of her core traits, I would say.
Right. And she's in sort of a unique position that she has this gift, and she's feeling a great deal of pressure from everybody around her to do something with it, when she herself feels like maybe all she wants to do with it is just enjoy it for herself.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of these outside forces applying pressure on her?
You mean like just specifically within the book?
Yeah, let's talk about say her parents. What their reasons for doing that. The people she runs into, what because all these people in the industry are expecting things from her and all she's done basically is just be. Like
Just exist.
she hasn't gone searching for it.
Right. And yeah, and all she has is kind of the blessing of an intuition for singing. That's all it is that kind of like natural vocal prowess. And that's one of those things where a lot of people are like, you got to take this and run with it. And she's like, I kind of just want to be me. And that's where the title of the book derives relatively early on. She's like, being unspectacular is that's what's okay with me, right? That's where the title comes from. It doesn't mean much else beyond her being like, maybe I'm okay with not having ambition kind of thrust upon me just because I can sing. So yeah, within her household, there's a mothering expectation that comes from her mom, whose first name is Ingrid, and whose kind of life story we don't really know. We just know that what she really wants is to see May do well and probably do well in a way that comes from a place of greater pressure than I think would be healthy. And then she has an adoptive father whose first name is Robert, who's an entertainment lawyer. So he's worked in the music industry for a long time. And from him, there's a lot of explicit pressure that's associated with financial gain that you might see from music.
She's so young to be going through this and to be sort of dragged through this. It's not like we mentioned, she's not seeking it out herself. She's sort of being pushed and pulled into the music industry. And it's a very uncomfortable place for her to be. Have you come across people like that? I mean, have you experienced or known people who have experienced that sort of discomfort within such an industry?
I have, yeah. And so I've worked in music as an original artist for 10 years, probably a bit more than that now. So, to put like kind of a sidebar on that, I'm fond of saying Unspectacular is a very heavily researched novel, just because I've been gigging and writing songs and recording and doing everything that's of a piece with that since I was like 15. So, that's a big part of it. And you do meet a wide variety of different types of people along the way on that sort of journey. So when I was younger, I used to have this kind of not quite templatized, but in my mind, this like rock and roll narrative where like the world kind of tells you not to do original music and you like go out there and do it anyway because you're a punk and like you want to make art, for yourself. And then I got older and the larger variety of people I got to know, the more I saw that there are a lot of those kind of like music families where there's a kind of inversion of that template that you might expect. And it turns out that there's a lot of parents who say what you have to do is go out and do music because that's what we did, or because we want you to do better than we did, or we have like connections that we want you to utilize. And so I felt like that was kind of I find that arc very compelling to say something, at least when I think of music, it's like something someone would love so much they would choose to pursue it for its own sake, which is a question that's at the heart of the book. But what I thought was compelling when you asked, have you seen anyone kind of get dragged into it? And it's like, yeah, that's to me mystifying. So it's kind of worth exploring, it's worth investigating to say, what does that mean? What would that look like?
Right, right. Well, let's talk about Ajay, your other primary character
Yeah.
in the book. Can you tell us a little bit about him and what he's experiencing?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm very fond of his arc, to be honest. Like writing it was just such a weird joy. You've written books, you get it. Um, yeah, so Ajay is 30 years old. He's a first generation Indian immigrant who, like May, lives in Greater Chicago. He happens to be a software engineer, so he works in project management at kind of like a humorously stuffy corporate environment. Has to go into the office every day and put these kind of like corny like clothes on and play the part. But meanwhile, he's thought of as a highly skilled drummer who's worth hiring for a wide variety of different gigs. And so from page one of Ajay's narrative, he's constantly wrestling between like, not only how do I manage my time, which for him is like a huge problem. He's very neurotic about it. Not only how do I make it all work in my schedule, but also how do I kind of play the character required to be each of these things. So he'll go into the office to like manage a software implementation platform thing, still kind of reeling from being up all night at a gig the night before playing drums. And or he'll then show up to a gig and he's still wearing like dress shoes or something and feels like a little bit silly. And so he's always feeling out of place. And so that duality of which of these kind of people am I, that's really central to Ajay's problems. And then the other, to me, very obvious duality portion is his first generation immigrant narrative. How tied am I to the bloodline and to my immediate family members that I have in India who are not here? But also, I'm like this very Americanized person who works at a software company and I play drums in rock bands. And that much like May, he's always dealing with like, am I sort of just out of place wherever I go, you know?
Right. And his relationship to music and the music industry is a bit different from May's.
Yeah.
And yet he, again, pushed and pulled, but sometimes in the opposite direction. While he may want to be in it more, the pressures keeping him out of it are tremendous. The way you write it, there is a huge divide between, say, his day job and his night job.
Yeah.
And he is struggling to do them both well. Can you give us a little bit of an example of some of the things he is dealing with in both and how he's trying desperately to please everyone?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, trying to please everyone by being good at a lot of different jobs was also something that was heavily researched, going into this book. Like, if you do music professionally, you probably have some sort of other job. So I've seen a lot of people kind of do the stuff that Ajay was like beset with dealing with. I guess when I think of like if you're kind of asking for like mechanical specificity about what makes his days such a pain in the butt, like I I felt like being an employee is one of his kind of central just like, oh my God, this is worth tearing my hair out over. I set up his manager whose name is supposed to sound like angina, which means chest pain, which is like something he has to deal with, which I thought was funny. But that is part of it is like she's giving him these kind of like arduous projects or they seem um just like not inherently worthwhile. This is what we have to do for a client meeting. But if you're the employee and you want to keep your job, it's kind of your role to just like kind of nod and be like, okay, okay, I have to kind of do what my manager's telling me because that's what jobs are. And if you're a session musician, it's a lot of the same thing of kind of your life becomes easier if you take orders even if you feel kind of lost at sea as to whether those orders have inherent value. So to me, that's like a tussle that is always at the forefront for him.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the other characters that appear in the book because those are your two primary, say, points of view or primary storylines. But you've got a number of other colorful characters that you sort of sprinkle throughout. Give us maybe one or two of them, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll do one perhaps. And you would have noticed this, of course, but I kept the orbit of Unspectacular like very small on purpose. I would say there's a pretty enriched world around it that I spent a handful of years developing, but I really like novels, especially that have to do with like family psychology or like rock bands. I think it's very satisfying when there's like a little orbit and everyone can be interconnected. So anyway, yeah, the POV thing is relatively it just comes from a relatively small circle, but I'm very fond of the character Emily as well, and she is May's music teacher. Primary instrument is piano, helps May with a lot of singing related stuff. And from page one of hers, it's very like she calls their music lessons, she calls them session. And May's like, that's kind of like therapy. And so I think without being too heavy-handed about it, I put Emily in this role of like, I'm going to be a sincerely supportive person, not the sort of supportive person who's like, oh, you're good at singing. I'm going to like hammer this home for you the way that your family always has. nor the type of supportive person who's just really permissive and says like you should do whatever you want because you don't know what you want in life and I'm going to just be permissive. She's actually an advocate, for this young woman who's doesn't know exactly what she wants out of life. And Emily has like kind of a strong sense of memory and a sense of sentimentality of her own that I think we get from her as the novel develops. So she's sort of like a favorite, I guess. Like when you were like, tell me about someone else, I was like, well, I really like her. A lot of people could probably use someone like Emily, I think.
Right. And that's true. That's true. Well, I'm curious about your own experiences in the music industry. And because you talked a little bit about this book being well researched.
Yeah.
So, what did you draw from what in the book sort of parallels your own experiences or things that you have seen and witnessed? And what were other things that you made up, either because you just took like things that you had heard or things that you had wished for or things that you thought would be interesting but you hadn't really seen. I'm curious what was close to true life and what you chose to just completely fictionalize.
Yeah. Yep. I've been asked that question before. And I'm trying to think of the most like graceful way. I do feel, I mean, almost everything in it is very truly fictionalized. Like I'm not thinking of any vignettes that were like, I had to get this off my chest because it's like the but the world of the book, though, is very real. And so I think one of the things that I hope would people would take away as the upshot or as like sort of a question in it is like what music is preserved in cultural memory and how much does that matter? Like the idea of music as legacy and as artifact and as something that has inherent meaning, that's something that I think about all the time. That like every record I've ever played on is kind of cool to be like that, ideally will last forever on someone's computer or something. But that the character Emily has a fixation with that. May's mother Ingrid has a fixation with that question. There's also like a semi-tragic character named Johnny who's like in his mid 40s and kind of has had a career and kind of doesn't have a career any longer. And so he wrestles with that question a lot. Like, if you've already made things that last a long time, but people don't seem to be paying attention to them and kind of like the pop cultural ecosystem, how much does that matter? I suppose that's not really an answer to your question of what in the book is real, but I think wrestling with those questions, though, has been a centerpiece of my career for a long time. I think, and you and I just talked about this with Ajay, but that issue of balance and that almost impossibility of striking it, right? There's a scene in the novel where he like gets a big gig. He's underprepared for it, which is a situation I've been in, probably every week since I was like 25. And he's really behind on this gig. And he's also like brings his laptop to a bar show where there's like comedians and people drinking and like everything's a mess. And he's also trying to like finish a software project. And like, I've seen people do things like that a lot. So that sort of thing is drawn on the world that I have lived in for a long time.
When you wrote this book, I'm curious if any of your views or opinions or feelings about music or the music industry or your relationship to it changed from before you started it to after spending so much time with these characters and thinking through their stories and their journeys and the ramifications of their actions. Did you come out the other side of it changed in any way?
That is a fantastic question. Because the question, right, is like, did writing this book change you as a person,
Yeah.
specifically in relationship to my relationship with music? I gotta think about that one. I I think writing it made me think a lot more, I guess just with like an expansion of nuance on the same questions that I set out to answer. I mean, the question of like parenting vis-a-vis having a kid with musical instincts is something that I've been thinking about since I was like 5 or 6 years old, just because that's what my life has been. It's certainly something a lot of my friends have also been thinking about their entire lives. I'm trying to think if I had like a personal turning point. I'm gonna think of something later that will be the most like astute, awesome answer. Yeah, I don't know if my ideas about music itself shifted as a result of writing Unspectacular, but now that's I'm gonna be thinking about that like all day though.
Did
I'm
you
sure
find
they did.
yourself, instead of maybe more answers or more or changes, did you find yourself thinking about new questions or just more questions or
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I feel that if you're doing any creative work and you're not like creating more questions for yourself, you might be missing something. Not just intellectually, but just like problem solving wise. Like if you're gonna write a book, right? It's like I start inventing, this guy Johnny with his tragic story, and suddenly I have to like learn all these different things to populate what his issues are. So that's just an example of like, well, yeah, then I had like 40 more questions from the time I started figuring out who this guy was and what his issues are.
right, right. Is there anything you hope readers take away from the book? And sort of the follow-up question would be, have you gotten response from any readers about what they have taken away from the book, and did that match, or were you surprised by their reactions?
Yeah, well, I'll say this, and I will once in a while. I'm fond of introducing my music like this at my shows. Like, so I should back up to that. When the book was published in January, I had my band play like a giant rock show to celebrate it because that's just what we do. Like, if I release an album, I play a show. If it's my birthday, I play a show. So we got like, there was like a grand piano, and me and my band like played a show, and we had a cake with the book cover on it. And it was really fun. And so the songs had nothing to do with the book. They're just like my incredibly narrative, like quirky rock band story songs. And then I was like, we're here to celebrate the book. It was very, very, very fun. And someone there who had not seen me before, it was really thoughtful. She was like, your music is like up. And I kind of like didn't understand what she was trying to say. And her friend kind of helped her explain it. And she was like, your songs all start pretty like person's in kind of like a sad situation or a dark place or they're lost, or I would say bittersweet. But she was like, your songs, they all end with this kind of like message of optimism. Like they all seem like they're going to be sad songs, but there's a nice takeaway there, which was very sweet of her to say. And I do think that in the process of writing and rewriting on Spectacular like 20,000 times, like by the time it was done, everything came around to what my true ethos is from like a writing instinct standpoint, which is to say, like, I do like to write about sad stuff. I think it's important. But I personally do feel that all the takeaways are positive. So I'm not going to tell people in this interview like where all the characters land, but I think everybody learns something about life balance. And those takeaways I think are good. I guess what I'm trying to say is the upshot is like a genuine optimism. You also asked if people had already gotten back to express takeaways. Um, I I have had more than a handful of people reach out that are musicians who have raised kids who are musicians and say that it like thought it made them think really hard about like pressure and what they've like kind of how they've had their familial life operate. And it came from a good place. It was kind of like a wow, thank you. Like I feel seen because I've lived in this world too. And that was incredibly thoughtful. But that's like a specific takeaway where I was like, oh my gosh, like I was making that up. You know what I mean? Like these are people that lived it. And
Right,
so I
right.
must have done a pretty, I guess, convincing job. But yeah, that was a really nice reflection of a takeaway. I'm trying to think of anyone else who finished it and said, like, here's a specific thing I felt like I walked away with.
Well, you can get back to me if you think of something.
Oh yeah,
Just
yeah.
send me a note with all the revelations you have after we're done,
You
when
never know.
recording ends. Were you always a writer? I mean, specifically like this, not necessarily a songwriter, because I imagine you've been doing that forever. But is writing books or stories something that you have always wanted to do?
100% yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was just a very like writerly little kid. You know what I mean? Like I had like Narnia on hand like all the time. And it's like being a fan of anything. Like I was just such a reading kid. That was the thing that I like understood sort of, school. I was not very big on school, but like loved English, which like is a type of person. Like AP Lit was like awesome, everything else was really hard. And so I think having those very, very, very writerly instincts from a young age is a good thing. I never thought about studying music, but I have an English lit degree because when I was like 18 or 19, I was like, that's the only thing I think I'd want to study, if I go to
Mm.
college. So yeah, I wasn't writing prose in a very like serious way for a long, long, long time. But the way I kind of attacked it, like in school systems, like prose writing, that was something I really, really, really liked.
Yeah. So why this book and why now? Like, what was the spark?
Yeah. When you say why this book, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, you could have written any story. So what was it about this story that captured you? And why now do you think at this stage in your career?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can answer the second question first, just because that's sort of a straightforward one. So I started writing Unspectacular at the end of 2021. So I think I was 28. Yeah. And it was at a point in my career where, like, with the music thing, so I make music under my own name, like, very much. Very, 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 like, proactive, prodigious, whatever. I also play in 10 bands in the Twin Cities, which is it's a schedule. And there was a point in my career at that time where I remembered thinking like all of the effort I had been putting into my own creative work just had to be put like all the way to the wayside just for schedule reasons. And that came all the way back around to like, okay, well, now I kind of need like a big private project creatively to focus on that is mine. And with novels, especially a person's first novel, the sheer scope of it is what makes it really fun for me because like I'm kind of crazy. So I could have done like I'm gonna write a few short stories, but it was like, no, I want to get like fully immersed in like notebook after notebook, like all these tabs open for research, like get all these library books to learn about like Ajay plays cricket. I got like 10 cricket books, like the history of like the British occupation in India because I was like, I just want to write a novel. I think it'd be so cool. And in any case, that was kind of the reason for when. It was like at this point in my career, I want this giant project that is mine. I will say too, with songwriting, um, I have many, many dozens of songs out, and there's like millions of things you can do to make songs different, especially narratively. But I was like, I've written a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot of songs. I want to write like something else, and kind of like and do this art form that I've admired for so long that I've like taken literature so like seriously. It was like this is what I really, really want. So that you asked when, and then I think the question why. I mean, I just feel the questions that I set about exploring by writing Unspectacular are questions that I find compelling to investigate. And they're also questions that I know a lot of people that live in the kind of world that I live in are also walking around thinking about like all the time. So I just felt like there's inherent merit in that. One thing I'll add to that too, most of the music novels that I've read are about like fame, and I think
Mm.
there's a lot of reasons in storytelling why that is attractive. Like obviously it does well on television, it does well in movies and so on. And there's a lot of archetypal kind of like rock star stuff that people like. And like I enjoy those books too. But I think Unspectacular in the title kind of belies some of this, right? It's like a music story that is not like this is the glory, we played LA and we played Nashville and we played Vegas and there are arenas of adoring fans. Like there's no arenas. This is a lot more of like a man, I'm 30 and I came to this country with nothing and I work in an office and I'm a drummer, but it's like his struggle is like super important. It's of equal importance to a famous. But that was one of my why questions was like, I want that book to exist. I'm sure there are others, but it's just they seem harder to find. And I felt like that story is very much worth telling.
Right, right. So what's next for you? Do you have another novel in the works?
I love this question. I'm always doing like a million a million things. And so funny enough, well, you'll appreciate this specifically. So like the last couple weeks, it's really been my full-time job booking my East Coast tour. So I'm going out. I live in Minnesota, and I'm going out to do a full East Coast run for 2 weeks in June. And this will be my third tour just of 2025. And the tour, I call each of them a very unspectacular book tour. And I I don't know if I'm the only person doing this, but like I perform full sets of my original incredibly narrative songs. So I go up there, it's me and a piano, and it's like 45 minutes of like show tunes essentially. And I'm like, well, the reason I'm here on the road is because I spent 3 years working on a novel. It's finally out. It's titled Unspectacular, and it's a music story. Please come find me at the merch table. And people will look at the t-shirts and stuff, but they'll be like really kind of moved by the existence of the book, and that it's really touching. And I think something that's exciting about that, writing a book, as you've done it many times, is it's such a like work of kind of private like resilience and private failure and just like the hustle that nobody sees. And then in January, it was like my life got flipped inside out because it's like the most public thing ever, which like I like.
Right.
Um, but I didn't plan for my career as a songwriter and my career as a novelist to like fit together. I was just like, these are the things I really want. And now I'm like, I can tour my book by playing shows. It's awesome. So the what's next for Zach is very much like, well, we're gonna do like Chicago, Cincinnati, Newport, Boston, Philly, Pittsburgh, Rhode Island. Like it's just all of that back to back, like me and my car. And one of my best friends is gonna fly out to sing with me. But it'll be me and a box of books and my piano. And so that's the very immediate what's next. I'm also in the studio like constantly. So I have a lot of music coming out soon as well. I'm gonna put out an acoustic record hopefully this summer and then put out like another very electronic record maybe around the same time. I don't exactly know yet. And yeah, I don't know how much your listeners follow the music thing, but I also release music quite a bit. So I have a new song that just came out on Valentine's Day, and I've got other stuff brewing. So my what's next is always like, oh my God, like you should see the sheets of paper with the plans and I'm in the very early stages of like I journal stuff that I think will fit well for a second book. Carving out focus though right now. I mean, my God, I try to
Yeah.
do so many different things. How do you do just one thing?
Right. Well, and you are insanely busy, it sounds like. So, yeah, I think writing another novel may be a challenge.
Yeah, I gotta find a balance,
Yeah.
truly. Yeah.
Maybe don't take a page out of Ajay's book on how to handle that.
Like stress management.
Yeah, that was
Yeah, it doesn't
not
go well.
terribly successful.
It doesn't go well for him. Yeah.
So, if people want to learn more about you, the book, your music, concert dates, all that kind of stuff, where should they go to find that information?
Yeah, honestly, Instagram has been my headquarters for a while. So the name is Zach Baker, Zaq Baker. I think I nudge people there partially just because like everything updated is always like fresh there. So stuff I have coming up will be reflected there. The website, zachbaker.com, is always a good hub. The homepage has all the bookstores where Unspectacular is available, which is a nice, like, steadily growing number. Most of them are in Minnesota, but there's quite a handful out of state now because now whenever I go on tour, I also like add the book to bookstores that are interested in doing consignment. So any of your listeners who happen to be based in like elsewhere, if they're all the way out in the Midwest, they can find it. If you're going to buy it online, you got to do it on Amazon, which I have mixed feelings about, but it's just what you have to do. Or I do mail days a lot. So like people that want them signed or just think it would be cool to get them for me. Like, I mean, I've got a box of books over there. So I do post office stuff pretty regularly. And then if they're into the music thing, I mean, I highly encourage people to find my music online. Same artist name, Zach Baker. Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, any of them. It's all there. I got a bunch of YouTube stuff, music videos, and concert film also. So I can be found many places, but I feel like zachbaker.com is a nice like, oh, okay, here's where all the other stuff like
Right.
lives.
Right.
You know.
Good. Good. Well, hopefully people will check that out. And find you in concert and buy a book, which
Yeah,
is not
actually,
something you normally intend to do when you go to a concert. T-shirt, maybe.
yeah.
Leave with a novel. It's an interesting takeaway
And
for
that's
concert
been fun
goers.
too. Yeah, because on every tour, like I will do bookstore shows also because that makes sense to me. And it's great because people are kind of like the music is a differentiator, but then it's like, well, most of my life we go play music venues. People are like, oh my gosh, like you also wrote a book. And I'm like, yeah, that was my real dream this whole time. That's why I'm on the road. So yeah, if you have any listeners who are like up and down the East Coast, I'm going to start announcing the dates like very soon for the June date. So if someone is a fan of you and that was why they came out, that would be so awesome. I would be deeply moved by that because it's no shortage of work trying to put a tour together.
Right. No kidding. Well, Zach, I wish you luck with the tour and Unspectacular and and all the other projects you have going on. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far. Best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me, Stacey.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.